child at the time. We are very fortunate to have with us Mr. Ahmad El-Assaad, who... Assad. I thought if I say Assad, you will say this is a Persian. Yeah, I said if I say Assad, you will say this is a Persian pronunciation. So switch it to Arabic. Okay.
Make it clear.
Okay. He is one of the most moderate and vocal political leaders in Lebanon. And today, he's going to speak about both the political situation in Lebanon and also the region and the impact of the extremist movements and what can be done to alleviate and ultimately eliminate these movements. But what is also interesting for us is that he's the founder, director, and chairman of the Saving the Next Generation Foundation, an organization which offers education and recreational opportunities to youth in the region and provides scholarships for young Lebanese and non-Lebanese to go to college. So I hope you will cover both issues, what you do privately and your political view. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Doctor.
Oh,
First of all, you're going to make me have problems with my wife. She runs actually the program at Saving the Next Generation Foundation, also together with Nancy Cal. First, let me talk about the political aspect, and then I'll come to the work of Saving the Next Generation, which is very important. The Middle East is going through a very tough and hard time. I mean, if we look 30 years back, we see that extremists in the Middle East were not that strong. Unfortunately, the clock has moved backwards in the Middle East, not forward. Now, extremists are everywhere, and they're going stronger and stronger. And if we look at how things were 30 or 40 or 50 years ago, how there was much harmony between Sunni and Shia. I mean, when I grew up in Lebanon, I did not know if my friend was a Sunni or Shia. I did not even bother if he was Sunni or Shia. We come to the conclusion that the problem is not Islam. The problem is this voodoo interpretation of Islam that exists nowadays. And unfortunately, the thing is that what's happening around the world is making these extremists stronger. And because they are getting stronger, like everything else that is new, for some people, for young people, they are becoming sexier, exactly like the communists were in their peak. I mean, if I'll give an example, in the 60s, communism in Western Europe was very in. Let's not forget, Italy was almost going to be a communist country. Most of the people in Italy were pro-communism because that was the wave, that was the idea. France, at that time in the 60s, 40% of the French people voted for the Communist Party in France. In my opinion, three things need to be done in order to deal with extremism. And we need to have a coherent plan. That is the most important thing. Exactly the same way that only Mr. Ronald Reagan had a coherent plan to defeat communism. Before his time, there was no coherent plan. We didn't know what to do with the communists, to negotiate with them, to find concessions with them. Only when Mr. Ronald Reagan came to the White House, he had a plan and he defeated communism. We need such a plan. And we cannot think that we can defeat communism or we can defeat extremism just from one day to the other. This is going to be a long road, a hard road. This is going to take a lot of time, a lot of hard work. But we need to go on that path. Otherwise, we might wake up 30 years from now and find out that the extremists are in control of the whole Middle East. And because we live in such a small village in the 21st century, this will have, of course, a lot of harm for the whole entire world that we live in. Like I said, 3 things need to be done. First, I'm going to talk about the US policy. Whether we like it or not, the US is the leader of the free world. When the US leads, the rest of the world follows. When the US does not lead, the rest of the world just watches and do nothing. Let's not forget what happened in Bosnia. Okay? That was the backyard of Europe, and the Europeans were talking about it year after year after year, and nothing happened. More massacres were happening, more slaughters were happening, until the US stepped in. When the US stepped in, the Europeans followed, and there was a stop that was done to these massacres. So US leadership is necessary. Without it, the world does not function. So thinking that not to have a political, active foreign policy is a solution, this is simply naive thinking. Because if you run away from confronting the problem, what will happen is that with time, the problem will grow. It will not disappear. It will grow. And this is what's happening. The problems of the extremists in the Middle East are growing because there is no active, coherent US policy in the Middle East, unfortunately. 2, we should understand that Iran, and when I talk about Iran, excuse me, doctor, I mean the Iranian regime.
I'm all with you.
We should understand that the Iranian regime is not part of the solution. The Iranian regime is part of the problem. The thing is that the last few years, we have to ask ourselves, why has ISIS become so strong, especially now, the last few years? Why? Because of their intervention in Syria, because of their intervention in Lebanon, because of their intervention in Iraq, because of their intervention nowadays in Yemen. This is creating a great feeling among the Sunni population. I'm Shia, but I say things how they are. Among Sunni population of the Middle East in general, and of the Arab world in particular, that we Sunnis, we feel that our pride is hurt, we feel threatened by this Iranian invasion, and since the world is gonna sit and watch, we are gonna join the likes of ISIS to defend our rights. This is what is happening. This is why ISIS has grown tenfold since Iran ordered Hezbollah to go fight in Lebanon, in Syria. Because the way they see it, were it not for Iran and the help the Iranians give to Bashar al-Assad, whether directly or indirectly through Hezbollah, Bashar al-Assad wouldn't have been able to be still in government in Syria. Iran is part of the problem, and we cannot have a double standard US policy in the region that says, on the one hand, you know, the Iranian regime are radicals, but these are radicals we can deal with and talk to. While ISIS is a radical movement and we cannot talk to them. This is double standard, and this is only aggravating the situation on the ground and making the likes of ISIS more and more popular. Because at the end of the day, we should not forget that this Iranian regime is the Iranian regime that finances Hezbollah, that finances and supports Hamas, that finances the Sadrists in Iraq, that finances and supports the Houthiyyin in Yemen. All these organizations, all these terrorist organizations that in every country of the world, they are known as terrorists, all of them would not have existed without Iranian funding and backup. So how the hell are we going to think that Iran is a country that we can deal with? We cannot. This is double standard, and this double standard is only making things worse and only making the case of ISIS and the likes of ISIS stronger on the ground and giving them the opportunity to be more and more popular. So therefore, the solution is we have to have one standard and apply it to all. We have to weaken ISIS and the likes of ISIS, and at the same time, weaken the Iranian regime that supports all these terrorist groups. Because we have to understand one thing, extremism on one side strengthen extremism on the other side. It's a vicious cycle. That's how it goes. Two, what needs to be done is that, and this is our homework of people like I in the Middle East, and we should do it, is that we need to be, in general, more brave and more courageous. We cannot think anymore that we can coexist with these radicals and these extremists. The problem that is going on in the Middle East now is that many leaders, so-called leaders, have double tongues. What they say in private is different than what they say in public towards these extremists. And they believe that somehow they can coexist with these extremists. This is not only naive, it is very wrong, and it is very harmful to the future of our region. Because at the end of the day, we have to understand what we mainstream people want from the Middle East. We want a Middle East that's prosperous. We want a Middle East that is part of the 21st century, where there are jobs, where there's employment. We want a Middle East that is the pride of the region, of the world. But that's not what these extremists want. These extremists do not want that. On the contrary, they want wars, they want bloodshed, they want hate, they want poverty, they want ignorance, because this is the fertile ground for them. This is how they can recruit more and more people. So you cannot exist or coexist with these kind of people. You cannot think that there is somehow a deal that can be struck with them. There cannot be a deal. It's you or them. So therefore, we people in the Middle East, people that want a real bright future of the Middle East, we should also do our homework and stand up to these extremists and say things as they are and not hide anymore and live in a gray area. The third thing that needs to be done, and here comes the part of saving the next generation, is that we have to understand what enables the likes of ISIS to recruit young men. Believe me, most of the young men ISIS recruit, they do not recruit them because these young men believe so much in their mumbo jumbo. They recruit them out of economical necessity. The bottom line is as such. Take a young man who has no job, no prospect, no education, no hope, offer him a Kalashnikov and tell him, I'll give you $500 a month and I will tell you who to fight. He will go fight because he has no other alternative. The same young man, give him a decent education, give him the capability of having a decent job, raise a decent family, have a good living, and then tell him, here's a Kalashnikov. He'll tell you, go to hell with your Kalashnikov. I have other things to do. This is the reality on the ground. These extremists are strong because they know how to take advantage of poverty and of ignorance. Look at the map of the Middle East. Where do you see the likes of ISIS and all these Nasra and these beautiful names? You see them in countries, especially, where you have poverty and ignorance. Look at the Emirates, for example. They don't have anything. Why? Because you have a well-educated population in the Emirates, and people have jobs. They have things to do. They're not interested in this voodooism. So therefore, a lot of money is spent throughout the world on social programs in the Middle East. However, very little is being done to solve extremism. And with all modesty, I say that we at Saving the Next Generation, we have a model that works. Why? Because we go to these ghettos. We take on kids early on at the age of 10 years old, and we do a lot of recreational and educational activities with them, things that they have never imagined that they could possibly do. We take them on a trip every month to a different region of Lebanon to make them understand that the Christian in Lebanon is not their enemy as they have been told. The Sunni in Lebanon is not their enemy as they have been told. The Druze in Lebanon also is not their enemy as they have been told. They're just kids like them. They cry at the same things. They laugh at the same things. They want the same toys. We take them to a camp in Tanourin, which is a Christian village in the mountains of Lebanon, 2 times a year, each time 3 days. There is snow in the winter. They do ski. Imagine these beautiful kids coming from these poor areas doing ski. That's why we built the camp in Tanourin. They do different activities in the summer and different activities in the winter. And then at the camp also, we give them a computer course because a lot of these kids, they come from such modest background that they know very little about computer. An English course as well, simple English course. And we make them watch a documentary. And it's always a documentary that breaks some taboos for these kids. We tell them to broaden their mind and to think for themselves and not take things for granted because they have been told to judge this or that way. And all along, we tell these kids that you have to be good at school, you have to do good, because when you are 17 and you finished high school, we will sponsor you in some of the finest universities of Lebanon or in the US. So far, we have more than 1,500 kids in our program. These kids are mostly from the south, the Bekaa, the suburbs, and also from the suburbs of Tripoli. We have 157 students that we sponsor in some of the finest university in Lebanon. And not only we sponsor them, but my lovely wife sits with them and advises them what to major in. Because at the end of the day, the whole idea of them having a major and a good major from a good university is to be able to have a job. Because if they do not have a job, then we didn't reach anything. It's only when they get a job and a decent job, that's when they are freed from these extremists and these radicals. So, for example, people that want to major in fine arts, unfortunately, the domain of fine arts in Lebanon is not like the domain of fine arts here in the US. There are no jobs for fine arts in Lebanon. So my wife tries to convince them that, come on, pick up another major that you like. Isn't there something else you like? Because, unfortunately, with this major, you'll not be able to find a job. The whole idea of them studying is to find good jobs. And that's why most of our students, they are into engineering, technology, medicine, things like that. Now, the one that do very well at school, the one that show promise, we bring them to the US. We have now 4 students in the US, and the number will grow. Why the US? I went to school in this country. I love this country. I believe this is the greatest country of the world. I have been all around the world. And why? Because, for example, even though it is apparent that I have a disagreement with the policy of Mr. Obama, but I believe that electing Mr. Barack Obama, who is an African American and whose father's name is Hussein, tells you what the American people are all about, how decent they are and how fair they are. And this could not happen anywhere else but here in the US. No country in Europe would have elected some minority, no matter how they pretend to be open, etc., etc. Unfortunately, though, the image of the US in the Middle East, not in Iran, but in the rest of the Middle East, is one of great Satan. And I want to change that image as much as I can. And what better way to find out if great Satan is really great Satan than to bring people here and live here and find out how fair people here are and how good they are, how decent they are. Then, with no time, they will find out that probably the real great Satan is the one who's been telling them that the US is a great Satan. And this is what's happening. We see already with the kids we brought here how their whole perception of the US is changing. Also, we have here among us Scott from World Learning. Also, we're going to start this summer a program with World Learning about the scholarship kids that we have in Lebanon, studying in Lebanon, because they don't have the opportunity to live here as the US scholarship kids. We're going to bring them starting this summer for a month to be here and go back to Lebanon. And they will not be here as regular tourists. I mean, they will be here and they will have a full program that will make them have a deep understanding of the American culture and the American life. They will be with families, they will be in a camp in the north, etc., etc. So also these numbers, also these scholarship students that we have in Lebanon, we want them to come more and more to the US to find out how great this country is and to change this, this myth and this big mistake about the image that the US has in the Middle East. These kids, when they go back, they become I don't want to say the ambassadors of the US, I want to say ambassadors of the truth. Of the truth. Not of some propaganda that they hear from different corners. I believe this is what needs to be done. First, we need to have an active US policy in the world, and especially in the Middle East, with a plan, coherent plan, long-term plan. We should not be doing, the US should not be doing double standard when it comes to its dealing with the Iranian regime and the other radicals. They're all the same. They're all two faces of the same coin. Two, we people in the Middle East, especially leaders, should be more courageous in calling things what they are and understanding that we cannot coexist with these extremists because our agendas are completely different. We want the culture of life, they want the culture of death and hate and blood. Three, we have to spend money on these ghettos. On these ghettos, there's a lot of work that needs to be done, like Saving Next Generation is doing, is getting to these kids before the radicals get to them. This is the hope. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We're going to open the floor now to your question, both about the political situation and also about the foundation and the activities about that. Let me ask the first question. You mentioned that the United States should have a coherent policy for defeating extremism, and it doesn't have one. Shouldn't we in the region basically decide once as a change that we are responsible for defeating these extremist groups in our part of the world and not look outside? Once again, you know, to the United States. You have now across the region, especially you mentioned the Gulf states, we have an educated class. And what is their role? I mean, it took ages for people, you know, both the clerical community, the intellectual community, the political community, to talk about the violence that ISIS was perpetrating on women. It took, you know, again, it had to come from the West to give them the courage to start talking about it. But maybe we should try and see whether it's possible to turn that way.
I agree completely with you, doctor, and this is why I said
Don't
that...
call me doctor.
But you are a doctor. You are my doctor.
Go ahead, yeah.
I agree completely with you, and this is why I said that we have to do our homework. We people in the Middle East, we have not done our homework yet, and we have to do our homework. And we have to stand up to these extremists and not be afraid and not be shy and not find grayish wording anymore when talking to them or calling them. However, whether we like it or not, what the US does is also something that has great I mean, it does a lot of, creates a lot of bad, especially now, because of the US policy towards the Iranian regime. You cannot be, I mean, you cannot call ISIS and the likes of ISIS extremism and a threat to the world at the same time running after the Iranian regime to make a deal with you and looking like you can be friend with this regime. This behavior only makes ISIS and Nusra and whatever you want to call them stronger and stronger. So there is a responsibility from the outside world to at least, if they don't want to help us, at least don't make it more difficult for us. by doing this double standard, it's making it more difficult.
Thank you. Yes, in the back, please. Can you please wait for the mic and identify yourself?
Sure.
Thank you.
My name is Nelson Garcia, and I'm president of the Washington Intergovernmental Professional Group. And my main question is basically the perception of the United States in the Middle East as it relates to providing funds and resources to organizations that you mentioned earlier. Anytime that happens, there seems to be a perception that they're either going to be a front for the United States government, for the CIA, or for whatever, even though its intentions are good. Has there been any effort by Middle Eastern countries such as the United Arab Emirates, Oman, Bahrain, and Saudi Arabia to take the lead on some of those efforts to educate, not just provide military arms and technology to these governments, but to actually go into the poor areas of these countries and actually establish a coordinated effort maybe with the United States in educating and providing the necessary resources to get them away from that type of mindset?
Great question. No, unfortunately, so far there hasn't been from these countries that you have mentioned. Hopefully, it will come, and we should all work together so that it comes, because I believe that this is a big part of the solution. The solution to extremism is actually offering an alternative path to these poor, young, very poor educated children. As for the first part of your question, you should not worry too much about what they're gonna say if you take money from this American institution or the other. Because no matter what you do, as long as you do not agree with them 100%, you're going to be called these beautiful names as being an imperialist and a Zionist and blah, 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 and all this. So don't worry. As long as you believe in what you're doing, this is the most important thing.
Thank you.
Yes.
Kathleen, here. No.
Dan Morgan. I'm Dan Morgan Russell. I'm with the University of Southern California. These kinds of conflicts are often characterized as a battle for legitimacy between different interpretations and kind of legitimate governments. And you talk a lot about education, but I'm wondering about religious education. Is there any, do you think there should be any attempt to promote a more moderate interpretation of religious doctrine, or say an extremist version? And are you undertaking any of those efforts to provide more legitimacy for moderate interpretations so that extremism can't take root?
Yeah, of course, but the thing is that my party, we're still not in power in Lebanon. Were we in power, we would solve the biggest part of Lebanon's problem, which is Hezbollah, because Hezbollah is actually hijacked Lebanon and is in control of everything in Lebanon. From the government to the army to everything is in the hands of Hezbollah. So yes, I agree with you that we need a more moderate view and approach when it comes to religion. And this is part of what my second point about what the new leaders of the Middle East have to do. They have to speak up about this. We cannot have these madrasas anymore like they exist in Pakistan. No matter what they're called and whose label they have, Shia, Sunni, all these schools, so-called schools, are breeding fanatics. And so we have to have leaders that say no to these kind of schools. And what we do with our kids that are part of this program at Saving the Next Generation is that we make them understand that a Christian kid is just like them. A Sunni kid is just like them. Nothing separates them besides their ethics, morals, sincerity. And this is what we do when we bring them together. This is what we do when we make them watch these documentaries. We always try very hard, and we succeed with time in making them more tolerant, more open, and more fair.
Kathleen.
Kathleen Keenest, I direct the Center for Gender and Peace Building at the U.S. Institute of Peace. First, I want to thank you and also congratulate you and your family's work in this area. I'm also glad to see that you are putting children into our security nexus. I think it's one of our blind spots. We still see children and women as, quote, civilians, but we are now seeing very active engagement of women and children in this terrorist efforts. My question to you is really about how to help young people exit once they're on board in these extremist groups. I hear you talking about tolerance among the children, but what about tolerance and an exit ramp for the young people who decide this isn't the path? And how do we reintegrate them into societies once they have been stigmatized and their families stigmatized as terrorists?
This is a great question. What I said is that most of the young men that join these extremist groups, they do not join them because they are charmed by their so-called principles. Of course you have fanatics everywhere that believe in this, but these are the minority, very small minority. The majority, they join because they have nothing else to do. What we do at Saving the Next Generation is take on kids early on because we believe that the same young man you are talking about, was he able to find a job? Was he able to have a decent living? He would definitely not be joining the likes of Hezbollah or ISIS or whoever it is. And it's easier why we take on young kids is because we still can work on their education. They still can have good grades in school. They still can go to universities. They still can go to that path. With these men you are talking about, it's a completely different situation. What needs to be done, in my mind, for these young men that have chosen this path is that you would have to educate them about some kind of work that they have to do. Give them special courses in about things that they can job that they can have that will give them secure income per month, etc., etc. But this is very difficult. This is very difficult because no jobs can be created in areas that are where there is no stability, where there is no security. Nobody wants to invest in these areas because the first thing anybody would look at when he wants to invest in anything is whether this area is safe enough. So it's, unfortunately, something needs to be done, but it is not an easy answer.
Me.
Thank you. Thank you for an excellent and courageous presentation. My question is around Lebanon this time. And you, as well as many who are in the audience, would know that Lebanon went through a period where freedoms existed, where tolerance, as you said, we never asked, is this a Christian, is this a Muslim? Tolerance dominated the mentality of the Lebanese. Not so now, because of Hezbollah. My question to you is, what can Lebanon do to weaken Hezbollah and finally, in the long run, to get rid of Hezbollah?
Very good question. I wouldn't expect anything else from you, Mike.
You need a looking glass.
Okay. First, let me go back. Allow me to go back in history a bit. Hezbollah started in Lebanon its infrastructure in 1982. That's 33 years ago. I remember when they started. I was a young man, and I used to hear people saying, "What are these people coming to do here? What are they doing? This philosophy, this religion they are preaching, it is something that we Lebanese know nothing about and do not feel comfortable with." And you have to give credit where credit is due. It's true, Hezbollah, according to our study, receives between $80 and $90 million a month from Iran. However, other Lebanese factions, they had received money from different sources in the Middle East, but they never did the work. They were corrupt. They put the money in their pockets. They profited from the money, and nothing was done. Hezbollah, you have to give them credit for that, is that they worked. They built an infrastructure. And this is why they are here, where they are now, 35 years or 33 years after 1982. So the whole idea, what needs to be done, is that it's, like I said, it's all about economics. Hezbollah employs 47,000 people in Lebanon. That's why when they do a rally and Mr. Hassan Nasrallah goes out to speak, don't think that these are people that, wow, love what he's saying. These are employees with direct families that have to show up at his rallies. They have to show up at his rallies. That's why you see 100, 150,000, 200,000 people at each rally. What you need to do, you need to build another infrastructure, like saving the next generation. You need to build another infrastructure that will weaken Hezbollah in the areas where Hezbollah feels strong. As long as Hezbollah feels that he has the south in his pocket, he has the Bekaa in his pocket, he has the suburbs in his pocket, there's no way Hezbollah is going to make any concession to the Lebanese state. Because even though you see them with a lot of beards, but they're not Santa Claus. Nobody is Santa Claus. Nobody gives in anything because they just are doing good. You have to create new cards on the table, and you do that by creating new facts on the ground, like I said. And this, in due time, it will not happen from one day to the other, because nothing does. And this, in due time, will make Hezbollah at a certain point, when he feels that the base, he is so convinced, is all in his hand, when he feels that that base is no longer 100% in his hand, this is when he will have to do the necessary concession. So we need a plan, and this is the plan, and we need to work on it every single day.
Amal Modelleli. Actually, it's kind of the same question, but from a different perspective. Thank you very much for being here, and thank you for your courage, and thank you for your work on the ground with the children. My question is, what's your assessment of how strong Hezbollah is now? We see all these reports about after Syria, they are strong, it's weaker. After the low prices of oil, Iran is not paying as much. Could you please give us your assessment of how strong Hezbollah is on the ground? And these children that Hezbollah has been indoctrinating also as young as 5 years old and 6 years old, are these a lost generation? Thank you.
Hezbollah is not strong on the ground. However, people are afraid to speak up because you are dealing with a very oppressive, cruel, unhuman party that has the audacity to call itself Party of God. I mean, look what happened to just an associate of mine, which wanted to do, which had a manifestation organized in front of the Iranian embassy a year ago, just because he wanted to give a message to the Iranians that, hey, you Iranian guys, you like Bashar al-Assad so much, you go defend him. Why do we Lebanese always have to pay the price for your plans? And what they did is that more than 300, there were just like 60, 70 people, and all young men and women, and more than 300 thugs of Hezbollah came out, and they attacked everybody. Some people stayed in the hospitals for 2 months. They were severely injured. And they came to the young man, to the brave young man who organized this at our party, and they put a gun in his stomach and they shot him 3 times. And he was dead. And they made sure that when he lay down on the ground, that nobody, not even the Red Cross, would be allowed to pick him up for at least 40 minutes because they wanted to make sure that he's dead. And this was in front of media, the Lebanese army, and the so-called Lebanese police. Until now, of course, nobody knows. We have pictures of the guy who did it, but nobody dares get close to this subject because they know that the Lebanese government is actually something called Lebanese government, but the real government is in the hand of Hezbollah. So the problem is that that was a message, that was a clear message, that who dares to speak up, look what happens to you. And of course, the story of Hashim, that was his name, Hashim Salman, was all over the news, and you must have heard it a year ago, but that was it. But that was a message to everyone, especially from the Shia community, if he dares to speak up. With us, after Hashim died, we felt that we have to speak up more and more and be bolder and bolder. Because this is the least what we owe to this beautiful young man that they killed in that barbaric way. The good thing is, Amal, is that Iran is not rich enough. You know, Iran is a poor country, actually. And it's a poor country because of this Iranian regime. This is not the Iran that existed in the early 70s or mid-70s. So the good thing is that Iran cannot buy all the Shias in Lebanon. As I said, that is not able to afford to have all the Shias in Lebanon in its payroll. So 70, 80, 90 million dollars a month is a lot of money, but you cannot buy all the Shias with that. So this is getting you a good chunk of the Shias, but the big majority is not getting anything out of Iran. So the big majority actually is feeling the hardship from Hezbollah because there's no businesses, there's no security, there's no jobs, there's nothing. However, because you are dealing, as I said, with a very cruel, unhuman party, very few people are able to speak up. It's exactly the same thing that used to happen in the Soviet Union at the time of communism. When you had elections, 99%, 99 voted for the Communist Party.
Egypt too, for Nasser.
Exactly. When things changed, we see now how the Communist Party gets maybe 16, 18% of the votes. from one day to the other. So this is the situation on the ground. People that are living out of Hezbollah, of course they're going to be with Hezbollah because that's their bread, that's how they make a living, but they are the minority, but they are a very cruel, oppressive minority. The majority is just too afraid to confront them, they go by their day, one day at a time.
Yes, we take the last question from the lady in the back.
Thanks for a great presentation. Again, I'm Sia Hegde. I work as a research assistant at the Wilson Center. I was wondering if you could talk a little about how your program helps empower young women who are able to make it to the university level and after, and what sorts of avenues do you resort to in order to ensure their means of overcoming any sort of cultural subjugations or institutionalized policies that might.
Can you repeat the second part?
Yeah, what sorts of avenues do you resort to in your organization that might ensure that women who are able to successfully complete the university level and are able to find jobs stand and work within a society that might in some ways hinder their progress later on?
Yeah. Well, this is a very good question because we believe that in the 21st century, in order for a society to be productive, every member of this society has to be productive. And any society where half of its members are put aside and are told, your job is just to cook and clean house, this is not a society that's going to do great things in the world. So we believe that women play the important role, or should play the same important role that men play. And that is why almost half of our kids are all girls and women, because we want to reflect that, the importance of having women part of this this new world we live in, and break these taboos if they exist. And that's why also the university scholars, whether in Lebanon or here, almost half of them are also women. I mean, one of the students, of the 4 students that is here, she's a girl. The students that will be coming next year, next fall, also almost half of them will be girls. So we make sure that our kids understand that there is no difference between girls and boys. And whatever boys do, girls can do as well. And actually, it's not such a big problem in Lebanon. I mean, this is, truth to be told, only in very remote villages you can find it a problem. But it's not a problem that exists like in other countries in the Middle East, because Lebanon is, in that respect, is more advanced and open.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Please
you.
join me in thanking Mr. Assad. Thank you very much. We heard a different perspective, which was very good.
Thank you.
you. Hope to see you again at the center when you come and visit
Definitely.
Washington. You know that there is this